The WTA didn't see it coming. And when Rafael Nadal stepped back onto a tennis court, the entire women's tour felt the tremors of what happened next. A 6-0, 6-2 scoreline, a packed stadium in Dubai that went completely silent, and a rising superstar who looked nothing like herself in the biggest match of her young career. Something wasn't right. The fans knew it, the numbers confirmed it, and the man who built Alex Eala from a 12-year-old scholarship kid into a top 50 weapon had questions that nobody in the WTA could answer. Was this just a bad night? Or was there something much deeper going on inside women's tennis, something the organization desperately didn't want you to notice? To understand why this story matters, you have to go back to the beginning, not to Dubai, not to the controversy. You have to go back to a 12-year-old girl from Quezon City, Philippines, who boarded a plane to Mallorca, Spain, with a dream that her entire country thought was impossible. Her name was Alexandra Eala, and she had just earned a scholarship, a rare, coveted seat, at the most prestigious tennis academy in the world, the Rafael Nadal Academy, a place where champions are not born, they are forged, point by grueling point, under the Spanish sun. Nobody in the Philippines had ever done what Alex Eala was about to do. Her country had no professional tennis tradition at the highest level, no Grand Slam winners, no WTA title holders, no top 100 players. The Philippines was a football-mad, boxing-mad, basketball-mad nation. And tennis? Tennis was something you watched on television, something that happened in other countries, to other people, under other flags. But Eala was different. Even at 12, the coaches at the Rafael Nadal Academy saw something in her that transcended nationality, a natural left-handedness that mirrored Nadal himself, a baseline ferocity that was rare for her age, a mental composure that coaches spend years trying to teach players and almost never fully succeed. She climbed, slowly at first, then faster than anyone predicted. In 2022, she won the U.S. Open Junior title, the first Filipina ever to claim a major junior championship. The Philippines erupted, the headlines called her a national hero, and still, she was just 17 years old. Then came 2025, the year that changed everything. Walking into the Miami Open, ranked 140th in the world and armed only with a wild card, an entry that critics said she hadn't earned, that her ranking didn't justify, that the WTA only gave her because of her fan base, Eala silenced every single doubt. She defeated Jelena Ostapenko, a Grand Slam champion, then Madison Keys, the reigning Australian Open champion. Then, in what can only be described as one of the most stunning upsets in recent WTA history, she dismantled world number 1 Iga Swiatek 6-2, 7-5. The little girl from Quezon City had just beaten the queen of women's tennis. Rafael Nadal was watching. From his academy, from his phone, from every corner of his world, the man who had mentored her, encouraged her, believed in her when the rankings said she was nobody, sent her a message of congratulation that he later made public. I am happy and proud of what you are achieving for yourself. Before a single ball was struck in Dubai in February 2026, the WTA had already created a crisis. And this crisis would become the first thread that, when pulled, unraveled something far bigger. Alexandra Eala arrived at the Dubai Tennis Championships as the most talked about player in women's tennis. She wasn't the highest ranked, she wasn't the defending champion, but she was the reason thousands of Filipino fans had bought flights, booked hotels, and filled the stands of a stadium in the United Arab Emirates, a country that has absolutely no geographic or cultural connection to the Philippines, at extraordinary personal expense. These weren't casual supporters. These were people who had traveled across continents, who had taken days off work, who had painted their faces in the colors of the Philippine flag, who had brought banners and drums and the kind of raw, unfiltered passion that most sports organizations spend millions of dollars trying to manufacture and still fail to produce. And the WTA's response to this extraordinary phenomenon? They scheduled Eala first in the evening session for her quarterfinal. Let's be very clear about why this matters. In professional tennis, the final match of the evening session is the prestige slot. It is the match that gets the biggest crowd, the most television attention, the best lighting, the loudest atmosphere. It is the slot that rewards star power. And when Eala had been given that closing slot in earlier rounds, because the crowds demanded it, because the atmosphere justified it, the Dubai Stadium had been electric. Then came the quarterfinals, and the WTA moved her to the opening match. The consequence was immediate and obvious. The Filipino fans who had waited all day, who had energy and noise and love pouring out of them, were now placed in a situation where after Eala's match, win or lose, they would likely leave the stadium. Eliana Svitolina, a former world number 3 and 4-time WTA 1000 champion, would then play in front of an arena that had been drained of its atmosphere. One report described it plainly. The WTA had made an error that would have real consequences, not just for ticket sales, but for the integrity of how they managed their most valuable commercial asset. The backlash from fans was instant and fierce. On social media, the comment section turned into a battleground. The WTA should have done their research better, wrote one fan. She should easily be on a bigger court, said another. And then came the question that nobody in the organization wanted to answer publicly. Why was the WTA seemingly doing everything in its power to minimize Eala's moments, despite profiting from the millions of Filipino fans she brought through the gates? This wasn't the first time. At the Australian Open just weeks earlier, Eala had been scheduled on Court 6, a venue with limited seating for her first-round match. Fans had traveled 12 hours from Sydney to watch her. 12 hours! And they were told to sit in a small, cramped, inadequate venue while a full-capacity arena sat empty nearby. One observer called the decision dumb. Another said it was unforgivable. The WTA issued no apology, no explanation. The organization simply moved on, as if thousands of heartbroken, disappointed fans were not watching their every decision with growing suspicion. And that suspicion was about to get a great deal more intense. Thursday, February 19th, 2026. Dubai. Center Court. The quarterfinals of a WTA 1000 tournament. Coco Gauff, the reigning French Open champion and world number 4, versus Alexandra Eala, the rising Filipina star ranked 47th in the world. The stadium was packed. The noise was deafening. Thousands of Filipino fans had come to witness what they believed would be the arrival moment, the match where their champion would announce herself not just as a wildcard success story, but as a genuine contender for the very top of the sport. The match began, and within 26 minutes, the first set was over. 6-0. A bagel. A shutout. The kind of scoreline that happens in practice sessions between coaches and beginners, not in the quarterfinals of a WTA 1000 event between two of the most hype young players in the sport. The stadium fell quiet. Not the quiet of tension, the held breath quiet of a match on a knife's edge. The quiet of disbelief, of confusion. The Filipina fans looked at each other, then at the court, then at each other again. This wasn't what they had come to see. This wasn't the Alex Eala who had dismantled Iga Swiatek. This wasn't the player who had taken apart Jasmine Paolini just days earlier in the same tournament. The second set was only marginally better. Gauff won the first 4 games without dropping a point of significance. Eala managed to hold serve once, broke Gauff once, cut the deficit to 2-4, and for a single, breathless moment, the Filipino fans allowed themselves to believe. They rose, they cheered, they called her name. Gauff broke back immediately, and then it was over. 6-2. 67 minutes. 33 unforced errors from Eala, the first bagel she had suffered in 4 years of professional competition. By any statistical measure, this was one of the most one-sided results of Eala's career. The numbers were brutal. Gauff won 80% of points on her first serve. Eala won just 27%. Gauff converted 6 of 9 breakpoints. Eala converted 1. It wasn't competitive. It wasn't even close to competitive. And here is where the conversation shifted from tennis to something much darker. Because Coco Gauff, in her post-match on-court interview, said something that the internet immediately latched onto. Speaking to the crowd that had cheered against her for the entire match, she said, "Whenever you guys were cheering for Alex, I was pretending it was my name. I think that it helped me a lot. If you can't beat them, you've got to join them. The crowd laughed, the commentators smiled, and on social media, a different conversation was beginning, one that questioned not Gauff's humor, but the nature of what had just happened on that court. Why had Eala, who had beaten a top 10 player without dropping a set just days before, suddenly been unable to win a single game in the first set against Gauff? Why had her error count exploded to 33? Why did the player who had shown composure under pressure repeatedly throughout 2025 and 2026 suddenly appear unable to find the court? These were the questions that fans were asking. And then Rafael Nadal, the man who had trained her, believed in her, invested in her, became part of the story in a way that nobody had predicted. Let's talk about Rafael Nadal, because you cannot understand the full weight of what happened in Dubai without understanding the relationship between this retired legend and the young woman who just suffered the most confusing loss of her career. Nadal and Eala's relationship is not a publicity arrangement. It is not a marketing partnership between a sponsor and an athlete. It is a genuine mentorship that stretches back 8 years to when a 12-year-old Eala arrived at his academy on a scholarship and Nadal himself took note of her talent. In November 2025, exactly 1 year after his retirement from professional tennis, Nadal returned to the court for the first time. His chosen practice partner? Not a former champion, not an ATP Tour star. Alex Eala. He posted the video to Instagram for his 14 million followers. She replied, "Back like you never left." He wrote, "Next time I will be stronger." When she won her first WTA title in Guadalajara, it was Nadal who posted publicly, "I am happy and proud of what you are achieving for yourself and for the Philippines." When she won her first Grand Slam match at the US Open, his academy celebrated it like a family milestone. When she defeated Iga Swiatek in Miami, he was among the first to reach out. This is a man who watches every match, who knows her game better than almost anyone alive, who has seen her at her best and at her worst, and who, by every account, cares deeply about her development, her well-being, and her future. Now, against that backdrop, consider what Nadal and the Nadal Academy's community were watching in Dubai on February 19th. The wildcard debate had been raging for months. Critics of Eala, and there were many, particularly from fans of other players who felt their favorites deserved the spotlight Eala was receiving, had been arguing publicly that the WTA was handing her preferential treatment, that she was being given wildcards, prime scheduling slots, and promotional attention that she hadn't statistically earned. One particularly harsh comment that circulated widely read, "Women's tennis needs to give younger players a chance at these wildcards," an argument that, ironically, was being made against Eala, the youngest prominent player in the conversation. But from the other side, a growing chorus of fans, analysts, and observers were pointing out something equally troubling, that the WTA was simultaneously over-promoting Eala as a commercial asset and under-protecting her as an athlete. They were using her fan base to sell tickets and fill stadiums while making scheduling decisions that undermined her performance environment, put her in inadequate venues, and then moved her to opening slots for the highest-stakes matches of her career. And then she lost 6-0, 6-2. The internet did not stay quiet. Filipino fans, already bruised by the scheduling controversy, already frustrated by the Australian Open Court 6 debacle. Let's slow down. Let's take a breath. And let's look at this story through the lens of facts, because the truth here is more nuanced and in some ways more damning than any conspiracy theory. The score of 6-0, 6-2 was shocking, but it was not, strictly speaking, unprecedented. Coco Gauff is a 2-time Grand Slam champion who won the French Open title in 2025. She had arrived in Dubai with something to prove after a difficult Australian Open, and in the days before facing Eala, she had posted some of the most dominant tennis of her recent career. She was, by every objective measure, in the form of her life. Eala, meanwhile, was a 20-year-old playing in her first WTA 1000 quarterfinal against a player of Gauff's caliber. She had never faced Gauff before in singles. The experience gap was real. The ranking gap was real. The Grand Slam winner gap was very, very real. These are not small details. And yet, The manner of the defeat, the 33 unforced errors, the 27% first serve points won, the inability to string together even 2 or 3 competitive games in the opening set, suggested something beyond merely facing a better player. It suggested a player who was not herself, who was unable to access the level she had demonstrably shown just days before against Jasmine Paolini in the same tournament on the same court. Eala did not hide from this reality. In her post-match press conference, she was, and this is the word multiple outlets used, brutally honest. She said, "Obviously, I think the gap between us was pretty prominent. That's not to say that I'm so far out of reach from these players." She added, "There's still definitely a gap in terms of level between me and Coco and other players of her caliber. My job is to try and close that gap." These are not the words of a player who believes anything suspicious happened. These are the words of a young athlete who was beaten thoroughly and is mature enough to admit it. And that maturity, frankly, is one of the qualities that Rafa Nadal's academy is most proud of instilling. On Instagram after the defeat, Eala wrote, "3 weeks of fighting with love and pride has come to an end here in Dubai." She quoted another player, Sabrina Santamaria, an American-Filipino WTA competitor, who had once said, "It's a privilege to play in front of people who see themselves in you." And Eala closed with, "What a privilege it is to do what you love with love." These are not the words of someone broken. They are the words of someone who understands that what she is building is larger than any single match, any single score, any single bad night. Gauff, for her part, was gracious in victory, perhaps more gracious than the circumstances required. She apologized to Eala's fans for how long they had waited. She said, "I know you were mostly supporting Alex, but I have to say, it is great to be on a crowded court." She praised Eala's competitive instincts. She acknowledged the atmosphere her rival had created. Here is what we know for certain. Alex Eala, a 20-year-old from the Philippines, trained since the age of 12 at Rafael Nadal's academy, has become the most popular player in women's tennis by any measure of fan engagement. She fills stadiums, she sells tickets, she moves merchandise, she trends on social media in markets the WTA had never previously reached. She is, commercially speaking, a phenomenon that the organization did not create, does not fully understand, and has repeatedly failed to properly manage. We know that the WTA made scheduling decisions around Eala that prioritized organizational convenience over athlete welfare, fan experience, and competitive fairness. We know that critics accused her of receiving wildcards she didn't deserve, while simultaneously the organization was benefiting enormously from the fan base those wildcards helped cultivate. We know that at 2 consecutive major events, the Australian Open and Dubai, the WTA got the staging of Eala's matches demonstrably wrong, at a cost to fans who had traveled thousands of miles and spent thousands of dollars for the privilege. We know that Eala lost 6-0, 6-2 to Coco Gauff in circumstances that were statistically unusual for a player who had just beaten a top 10 opponent without dropping a set. We know that the internet interpreted this through a lens of existing suspicion the WTA had itself created through its inconsistent, commercially motivated management of the sport's most exciting young star. We know that Rafael Nadal, the man most intimately connected to Eala's development, who practiced with her just months before Dubai, who publicly celebrated every milestone of her career, who knows her game in granular detail, said nothing publicly about the Dubai loss. And sometimes in sport, silence communicates more than any press conference statement ever could. What we don't know, and what the WTA has never been forced to account for publicly, is this. At what point does a sporting organization's manipulation of its own star for commercial gain become indistinguishable from corruption? At what point does bad scheduling, preferential wildcards, inconsistent venue allocation, and reactive press management cross the line from incompetence into something that demands genuine scrutiny? Eala herself gave us the clearest answer. Rising from a 6-0, 6-2 defeat in front of thousands of heartbroken fans, she quoted the idea that representing people who see themselves in you is a privilege. She posted about love. She thanked her supporters. She acknowledged the gap and committed to closing it. She behaved in every way like someone whose mentor had taught her not just how to hit a tennis ball, but how to carry herself when the world is watching. That mentor was Rafa Nadal. Alex Eala's story is still being written. From a 12-year-old scholarship student in Mallorca to a career-high world number 32, she has already rewritten what's possible for Filipino tennis and for women's sport in Southeast Asia. Rafael Nadal didn't just teach her a forehand, he taught her resilience, dignity, and the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly where they are going. The WTA may have fumbled the management of her rise. The scoreline in Dubai may have shocked the world. But one thing is certain, Alex Eala is not finished. Not even close. If this story opened your eyes, smash that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and share this video with someone who needs to see it. The truth in women's tennis doesn't always make the headlines. We make sure it does.